Hi guys, I'm Dr. Tara Tobias. I want to welcome you all back to my channel. I have to first of all apologize to you. That last video on the shoulder was probably a little bit premature. After getting some comments, some private messages, I got to thinking that we skipped over a huge step that I did in the last video, or in the last series on the leg, and that is explaining the why behind the what. So the why behind why your shoulder and your arm is behaving the way that it is if you've had a stroke or a brain injury. So we're gonna backtrack a little bit, and this entire video is gonna be devoted to the why, and I promise you, if you understand these concepts, it's gonna make it so much easier for you to be able to perform the exercises that I'm gonna be showing you. To get started, let's talk about what the brain does. So the brain receives information from our senses, interprets it, puts it all together, and is what basically controls our muscles. So after a stroke or a brain injury, that system is broken. So there's no movement, there's no communication with the muscles, there's nothing guiding the muscles. So there is a recovery process after a stroke. So they're called the stages of motor recovery. There's 5 stages. The first stage of the arm is flaccid. So most of you probably woke up and your arm was just limp, just laying there. Stages 2 and 3, you're starting to see a little bit of a twitch or a little bit of movement in the muscle. Stage 3/4, that's becoming a little bit stronger. So your arm's moving into more of a patterned movement. And in most cases with the arm, it is a flexor pattern. And then 5, you start to have the ability to isolate joint movement. So you're no longer working in patterns, but the wrist can move independent of the elbow can move independent of the shoulder and the wrist. So you're not moving in these patterns, but you actually can coordinate each joint separately. So that is how we recover. Now, at about the 4 to 6 week mark, in some cases, people develop spasticity. So initially, your arm might have been flaccid or limp, no movement. Then it started to move in patterns. Then those patterns got stronger and stronger and stronger. And you haven't moved to that 5th stage where you're actually able to isolate joint movement at each joint. There's a lot of theories on where spasticity comes from. One theory is that there's just now a disconnect between the brain and the muscles, so the muscles don't really have anyone controlling them, so they're just kind of acting on their own. Or they are overactive because they don't have that brain, or I'll call it the parent, kind of quieting it down, so they're just kind of going crazy without having that control. There's others of you that it takes longer to get out of the flaccid stage. So when the arm is limp, maybe you're 4-6 weeks out and you're still not seeing a muscle twitch. So those are the 2 big picture categories that we see when people get to outpatient. You have the flaccid arm or the limp arm, and then you have the spastic arm or the very overactive arm. So let's first talk about the flaccid arm. What are the big picture things that you need to be aware of if you have a flaccid arm? One is protecting the joint. So muscles hold the arm bone in the shoulder socket. So when you have a flaccid arm and those muscles are super duper weak, the arm's gonna fall out of the socket. So protecting that arm is extremely important. So we call that a subluxation, doing whatever you can to prevent a subluxation. If you are a caregiver that's caring for someone with a subluxed or a flaccid arm, you never ever want to move them or transfer them by pulling on the arm, because that can do irreversible damage to the shoulder joint and really affect the recovery process. And I've actually written a blog post on how to prevent shoulder pain, and I'll have a link for that in the description below. The other thing you want to be aware of is weight bearing. Weight bearing is so critical. A, it approximates the joint or puts the arm back in that good relationship in the shoulder socket, but it also gives input to the brain. Kind of makes you aware that there's an arm there. So weight bearing is an extremely effective treatment or activity to do early on. And then arm movement. Any arm movement over the shoulder is best to do laying down. And the reason is because you can use gravity to actually put that arm bone back in the shoulder where it has to be in order to reach overhead. If you do not do that and you're sublux and you're reaching overhead, you are jamming structures into each other and could be causing damage. So laying down actually drops that arm bone where it needs to be so it can roll nice in the socket. So now on the other side of things, some of you have a spastic upper extremity or an overactive upper extremity. So most of the time after the stroke, your arm is going to draw up into this position. And that is because there are muscles that are overactive in this whole region. Now, one thing that I think is pretty important to understand is you have two structures that really make up the top of the leg. Well, the shoulder joint's actually made up of 3 structures. That's why we have more range of motion. So you could see if it was just 2 attachments, 2 things moving, you would have a little bit less range from that leg. Now that we have 3 components moving on each other in the upper quadrant right here, we have a little bit more range of motion. So that's great. That's why we can reach, that's why we can get dressed, that's why we can do all the things that we need to do. Unless you have an injury to the shoulder or you have a brain injury, then that extra hypermobility becomes a little bit of a problem just because it's harder to control movement in a specific plane of movement, because movement in the shoulder is multi-directional. It moves in a lot more planes. So it just means that positioning is a little bit more critical and being careful is a little bit more critical, being very conscientious of your form when you're practicing some of these movements. So what creates that hypermobility? We have 3 bones. You have the shoulder blade back here, the arm bone, and the ribs. So what does this hyperactivity, what do these hyperactive muscles do to the positioning of this shoulder? Well, there are 2 muscles that are typically overactive in the shoulder after a stroke that pull the shoulder blade forward. So that's the subscapularis and the teres major. And then the lats and the pec major are usually very overactive. So that kind of pulls the shoulder down and pulls it into your side. Then you have the biceps long head, which is actually a 2-joint muscle, and that pulls that arm forward and flexes the elbow up. You have some pronator muscles that turn that hand down and also flex that wrist. And then you have some thumb muscles, and this is critical. There's thumb muscles that pull that thumb in. And then you have some overactive muscles that flex those fingers down. So you've probably seen this in a few of my videos, but a lot of times I pull that thumb out first. That is because of those overactive muscles that pull that thumb in. If you do that first, sometimes it will relax the fingers and the wrist just a little bit more. So we always start with pulling that thumb out, really get that relaxed, and then a lot of times it's a lot easier to extend the wrist and open the hand. So that is a flexor pattern. So just to review the big concepts, we recover from a stroke in stages. As you recover, you're going to be divided into 1 of 2 categories. You're either going to have a flaccid arm or an overactive or a high tone arm. And then what is the treatment? So number 1, if you have an overactive arm and your arm is pulled in here, range of motion, stretching is going to be so critical. If you do not stretch out or get some of those overactive muscles to relax, it's going to be near impossible to move the arm. So the movement we're looking for, this would be what I would say would be 100% recovered. Here and here. Because those are the 2 positions that are the hardest if your arm is pulling in here, is to get it here. So what are we going to work on? We're going to work on stretching and recovering movement in the shoulder blade, going into retraction, all the muscles that externally rotate the upper part of the arm. We want to be able to extend the elbow, extend the wrist, and extend the fingers. So getting this arm away from the side is usually a very challenging part if you have an overactive arm. If you have a flaccid extremity, you're not gonna really, your goal is not to start jamming it into this position. Your goal is to just start to get to that muscle twitch phase. So you do not need to aggressively stretch your arm. Remember, you're trying to protect that shoulder. But the one area you are gonna wanna stretch is you are gonna wanna stretch the shoulder blade. So going into retraction, that's for people that have a flaccid upper extremity. But the people with a spastic upper extremity, we're working, this is our goal. So the videos to follow are going to work on that. The first video is going to be stretching or range of motion for the shoulder, elbow, wrist, and hand. kind of working towards this position. Bringing the arm back behind you, bringing it out to the side, and lifting it up overhead against gravity are probably the most difficult movements to get back. But being able to rotate this shoulder out is actually very critical for all three of those movements. So in almost every video, we're gonna do something where we're externally rotating that arm. It's not only important to regain movement, it's also important to prevent injuries. I see a lot of people lift their arm up like this. And when you lift your arm up and your arm is rotated in, you're just jamming structures on the top of the shoulder into each other. So that's why in almost every video to follow where we work on the arm, we're gonna work on externally rotating it. So that's the direction we're going. You guys can expect a video probably on Thursday with the first progression of exercises for regaining movement in the arm after a stroke. If you guys haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. If you've subscribed but you haven't hit the notification bell, please hit the notification bell so that you can be notified when I post new videos. As most of you know that have been watching my other videos, I always respond to comments. There was a lot of information in this video. If anything did not make sense, please just leave me a comment below. I answer every single question. And I'm at pretty much 100% success rate right now of answering every single one of your questions. So again, if any of this does not make sense, just ask me a question, go to my website. I'll have a link in the description below to my website. You can message me that way. Some of you have already figured that out and figured out how to message me that way. You can message me on Facebook. Some of you have already figured that out. So my Facebook page will be in the description below. My website link will be in the description below. Or you can leave a comment right here. I make it super easy to be able to answer all of your questions. If you like this video, as usual, hit that thumbs up button. It helps me to know what you all want videos on and kind of helps me to make decisions moving forward as far as what types of videos I make. If you specifically like the stroke arm exercises, put hashtag stroke arm in the comments below. I am keeping track of that, and that's why I was actually so eager to get that video out last week, is that there were so many people that put hashtag stroke arm. I was like, oh my gosh, they really want this stuff, so I gotta get this video out, but it was a little premature. I think we needed this video. This is a good foundation. This is a good starting block. Thank you all for watching, and until Thursday, you all have a great night.